Hello everyone and welcome to How To in Access 2013. My name is Steve Bishop, and in today's video we're going to be talking about how to manage user access to the various sections of your database. So let's say, for example, you have regular users that you want them only to access just those sections of the database that users should have access to. You don't want them to have full administrative privileges, for example. And then there are certain sections of the database maybe you want only administrators to have access to, things like user accounts and settings within the database itself so that nobody can go in and screw with anything. So you're going to want to limit the access that different types of people have access to in your database. This video is going to outline one way of handling all that. There are multiple different ways that you can set up to manage user access. This is just a good middle of the ground. It's not too basic and it's not too complex. It's pretty simple to manage. Now, this is going to be a video that is an extension of the Programming and Access 2013 video series that I did. So if you have not seen that video series, I highly recommend that you do so. But if you have not seen that video series, don't worry, you can still watch this video and probably pick up plenty of information that you can utilize in your own database that you're working on in your environment. So either way, you should be able to use this video. I will also make the source code of this database available to you as a link in the description of the video. So for free, you can just go ahead and download the source code, take a look at it, open it up, and compare what I've got to what you've got in your own system. So there we go. Let's go ahead and hop out here and take a look at the database as it stands. And I just kind of want to give everybody a lay of the land because, again, some of you are probably coming to this video not having seen that programming series, so I just kind of want to show you guys where everything is. First and foremost, the database is actually split up into two separate files. One is the front-end data file that gets distributed amongst everybody in this, amongst everybody that's going to be utilizing it. And that front end is split up to have queries, forms, reports, and modules where all the VBA code is. All that is going to be in the front end. While these tables are actually linked from the front end to a back-end file that has all the tables and all the data in it as one single file that doesn't get distributed to anybody. It sits in a secure location on the network, and really the only way anybody has access to this file is through the front-end file that we give them. Okay, so all of that being said, let's talk about a little bit of some of the internal workings of this database that we've got set up so far. First and foremost, one of the things that you need is some sort of table that contains user login information. So we've got usernames, passwords, and who they are. So this could be a user table. We've called it Table 1 Employees, but just basically a table that each record is each record is a person that is logging into the database. And this is separate from Windows logins. Okay, this is not based upon the Windows login setup. It's strictly its own internal system of tracking users. Okay, and then you of course need some sort of login form that the user is presented with when they log into the database, or when they try to run the database. They're going to get prompted to put in a username, a password, and to log into the database using their credentials. So hopefully you've got all of that set up. If you have not, again, I have a beginner series that we go over all of those things and all of those concepts. So if you don't already have a login screen with user information and a user table, you probably want to go ahead and view that series now. But let's go ahead and assume that you already have all of that. So let's go to our table here where we've got our users, and you'll see that I have a column here called employee type underscore ID. This employee type underscore ID table is a foreign key field that points back to the table to employees types. And so you can see that an employee with an employee type ID of 3 is actually an administrator. And an employee with a type of 2 is an account manager. And then we, of course, have the number 1, which is going to be a sales representative. So that's basically how we are tracking, how we're keeping track of what type of employee is logging into the database. We can take a look and see that when I log in, I am an administrator to the database. So we want to relate this information, this employee type ID, to the form or report that the user tries to open. Okay, that's the relationship that we're creating here between the form that we're opening and what type of employee they are. And in our specific example that I'm going to demonstrate, we've got this form employees form, which is a very sensitive form. It has the actual employee information in it. So first name, last name, passwords, username, wages, etc. So whatever sensitive information that might be contained on this form should really only be available to somebody who is administering the database. Somebody who should be doing the new user account creation and changing passwords and that sort of thing. So we only want to have administrators be able to see that particular form. So we're going to make sure that employee types of 3 are the only ones that are able to see this form employees form. So since this is a relationship that we're creating between the employee type ID and the name of the form, and we're using a relational database management system called Access, it should probably become somewhat obvious to you that we're going to utilize the facility of relational database management to create a relation between different objects. That's kind of the point of relational database systems. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new table. And this table is going to contain the information about those relationships. Okay, so the first column that we need to put in our table is the first part of the relationship, which would be what is the employee type. Okay, and so we're going to do employee type underscore ID, and that is a number field. Okay, and the other half of our relationship is the name of the form that's trying to be opened. That would be form employees. So our next column is going to be form name, and that's going to be just a short text. Okay, I'm going to make one other column here, and that's going to be has access. And essentially what I want to do with this has access field is I'm going to make it a yes or no field, or a true or false, a Boolean field, whatever you want to call it. In Access, it's a yes or no field. And this is actually going to be the result we want to return, a yes or no, as to whether or not that particular employee type has access to that particular form. So when we go and look at this table, this has access value is actually what we want to return as yes or no. That employee does or does not have access to that form. So I'm going to have that field. I'm going to make it so that by default, whenever we enter in a new entry into this table, the default value for that new record is going to be yes. And then the last thing I need to do to this table is make a primary key. And I'm actually going to make this a composite key between those two fields, the employee type and form name, because ideally we should never have two records with the same employee type and form name in them. So you're only going to have one record with that particular employee type and that particular form name. Okay, so that's going to be my composite key. I've got my three columns here that I want in my table. Let's go ahead and save it. And I'm going to call it Table 9 Employee Access. Okay? So there we go. This is the table that's going to contain the information that relates this particular employee type should or should not be able to open that form. And the first value that we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and set up this relationship that we wanted between the form employee form and that employee that is an administrator. So employee type of administrator is going to have access to that particular form. So the employee type is going to be 3. The form name is FRM employees. And does an administrator have access to that form? The answer is yes, so has access should remain true. Now I also have employees here that are employee type of 2 and 1 and 0. I'm going to go ahead and go in here and I'm going to add the employee type of 2 to have access to FRM employees is going to be a value of false. So anybody who is an account manager does not have access to the FRM employees form. Okay, that's what we're setting up here in this record. Now for everybody else, sales representatives and any employees that might be a 0 here, I'm going to hold off on talking to you about them for just now. I just want you to see these two records with a 3 for an employee type, which is administrator, and 2, which are account administrators. And we can see we have a difference here of has access and does not have access. Let's go ahead and save that. Now, since I am dealing with a front-end, back-end situation for my database, I need to go ahead and link this new table that I created here, Table 9 Employee Access. I need to establish a link to my front end, so let's go ahead and do that now. I'm going to go to my front end database. I'm going to go to External Data, go to the Access, click on Link to the data source, browse to my data source, which is this file here, and open it. It's going to prompt me for a password. All right, and then I'm going to go ahead and select that new table I've created, click OK, and we can see now I can open up that table, that linked table from my front end, and we have access to it now from the front end. Okay, so let's go ahead and save that again, just because I like to save all along the way. All right, so now that we've got our table created with our relationships in it, we've got some data in our table, we need to start to do some of the coding. And before we can begin on this, we have to think a little bit about how we want to present a check. So we want to do this check. Well, where do we want to do this check? And how do we want to present the results of this check to the user at the time that they try to open up this form? So there's a few different options, and really I break it down to about 3. Number 1, you can either do the check when the form tries to open. You can do the check when somebody clicks on a button or does some sort of interaction to open the form. Or 3, you can even hide all of the interactions available. So you can try to hide any buttons that might go to that form. Let's start off with probably the safest way, the safest one to do first, okay? And that would be to check when the form is opened, when it's being loaded, check to see whether or not the user has access to it. That way, no matter where the user is in the database, when they try to open up that form, it's going to do the check. Okay, so universally, everywhere they try to open up the form from, they're going to be checked. So I'm going to go to the onload event for the form employees form, and this is where I'm going to start from. I'm going to create, in my form load, I'm going to do if. Now, since I have my data that has the information in it about, which user types have access to this form, I need to use some sort of way of opening up that table and checking that has access value for it. And the simplest way to do that is to just use a domain aggregate called dlookup. That's a dlookup function. You guys are probably very familiar with this function. And essentially, with the dlookup function, you need to return back the value from a field. So what this expr as string is the field that you want to return the value of. And that would be the has access field that I created there. And the domain is the name of the table, or you could even use a SQL query here if you wanted, some sort of SQL string. Or query itself. You could actually name a query that you've saved in your Access database. But this case, it's just table 9 employee access is the name of the table. And then the criteria is a string that you pass in that is essentially a where clause. Like if you were doing a SQL query, it's basically a where clause without the where in it, the where keyword. So that would be where employee type underscore ID is equal to, and here we need to think about this because we are checking based upon who's logging into the system, what is that employee type that person is that's logging in, and we're going to look into the database table here based upon that employee type. But so far, we don't really have any way to get that employee type. Yes, it exists, but we're thinking about when the user logs in, okay, that is the point in time where we know who the user is. If we just go to the login screen now and take a look at the code behind it, when the user clicks on the login button here, we should have something that, of course, goes and does the usual check to make sure the username and the password match up. But then after that's been validated, this is where you can grab that information about, okay, now that they've logged in and I know who's logged in, what is the employee type? And you can even see I've used that here in another part of this code. So I have a record set open right now during the login process that gets this employee type ID. So I can just go ahead and utilize that. And I need to store this information, excuse me, because the login form is not always going to be available. It's not always going to be open. This record set that gives me that value is not always going to be there. So what I need to do is I need to store this value in some sort of variable that I can recover later. What we're going to do is we're going to use the temp section, which is a global collection that Access will always make available to you. And I'm going to give it an index name of employee type. And in here, this is where this is the location that we're going to save the employee type that we get after they log in. So employee type underscore ID. So we're going to take the employee type ID of the person that's logging in, because the record set as part of this process is moving along the record set to the appropriate record, and then gives us the employee type ID of that employee that's logged in. And I'm going to pass in this value of employee type ID to this temp vars collection for the employee type index, and it's going to store it in the temp vars. Now this temp vars is going to be available throughout the entire application, and we can ask that every single time. We can ask, from wherever we are in the database, we can always ask the temp vars collection for the employee type. Now, one thing about when you're using the temp vars collection is that technically a record set, when you return a value such as this employee type from the record set, what's actually happening is it is an object that's being returned from the record set. And you can specify that you don't want an object, but you rather want the value of that employee type. So you can do .value, and that will actually specify that the employee type be returned as a value that gets stored into the temp vars. It's just kind of one of those quirky things. Access doesn't like any objects being assigned to this temp vars collection. Okay. So let's go ahead and save that, save our progress. We're going to, just one last time, I want to reiterate what's going on here, just in case I've lost anybody. When the user logs in, they click on the login button. It's going to go through this record set, find the username, make sure they've entered the right password, and then if all of that is correct, they've entered the right password in, we've got the right user that's logging in, it's going to store the employee type ID value, which is from this table 1 employees table here. It's going to grab this employee type ID value, and it's going to store that into this temp vars collection as the employee type index name. Okay, so we want to save that because we're going to need this temp vars a little bit later here for when we do the check on the form employees form. Now we can go to the onload event again, and while we're doing our lookup, our delookup, now we have the value of who's logging in. We've got the now we can say where employee type ID equals whatever the value of employee type is when they log in. Okay? And we also need to check, don't forget, we've got this table here, table 9 employees access. We're checking for, we're trying to get this has access value for this value and this value. So wherever this and this, actually I should probably look at this record. So wherever employee type is 3 and form name is form employees, give me that record. So we're going to do employee type underscore ID equals whatever the value is of the person who's logging in, and we need to do the form name is equal to, and we're going to do, just to make things simple, we're going to do me.name. Okay, so that's the name of the form that's being opened, right? And we're going to do a then and end our if statement. So if the user returns a value for the has access value of the table from the table 9 employees access. If they do have access, when we look at the record where the employee type ID is equal to whatever they have logged in as, and the form name is the name of this form, which is currently FRM employees, then if it's true, then what do we want to do? Well, if you think about it, the form is in the process of loading. And since it's in the process of loading, whenever it turns out that the user should have access, do we really need to do anything? Well, I'd say no. We don't really need to do anything. We don't need to stop it. We don't need to tell it to continue because it's already in the process of doing it. So let's just go ahead and change this from equals true to equals false. And what we're really checking then is, should the user not have access? If they shouldn't have access, then do command close this form. Okay. So we're going to close the form. Oops. We're going to close this form if the DLOOKUP results in a false return. Now, one other thing you probably need to do is give the user some sort of warning as to why, when they tried to open up the form, it didn't open, right? Because we don't want them to click on something, click on a button that they expect is going to open up a form, only to have it close right away and then not see anything. They're going to think the program's broken and the button doesn't work. So you need to do some sort of thing like message box, you do not have access. Okay, something like that, just so that they know, hey, you don't have the permissions required in order to get to this particular location. So let's go ahead and save that. Let's close all this down. Okay, and let's go ahead and give it a try. Let's go to the login form. Now, I am an administrator, so I have a employee type of 3. So S Bishop is my login. And when I try to log in, and I try to open up this form employees form, I go ahead and get access. I have everything I need. I have the employees form open up for me. But let's try Jane Doe, because remember, Jane, if we just open up this table again here, table employees, Jane is an employee type of 2, which, if you recall, should not have access, right? Employee type 2, when they try to open up form employees, they should not have access to the form. So let's give Jane a try, shall we? Let's go to the login form, JDoe. And when Jane opens it up and then tries to go to the form employees, there's our firewall. You do not have access, okay? So she's being prompted, she's being told, hey, you don't have access. The form closes, never really even appears like it opens, and there you go. So you've just prevented successfully, whenever somebody tries to open up the form, they get blocked. And even if I try to click on this button, which is supposed to open the form, I'm going to get the same issue. So I've only had to code that in one place. In the FRM employees, when it tries to load, I've only had to put the code in that one place in order to make sure that no matter how a person tries to open the form, they're going to get blocked. Okay? Now there is, let's try taking a look at Stan. So Stan here has an employee type of 1. And remember, we did not program 1 anywhere here in our Table 9 employee access. So let's see what happens when Stan tries to log in. Let's go ahead and log in here. S. Kurth. Oops. Did I goof somewhere? I might have goofed something up here. Shoot. Oh, come on now. Let's try this. Let's just make things simple here. Copy that. Make sure that he has the same password I do. Sorry about that, folks. Got a little administrative stuff I got to take care of here. All right, try this one more time. Let's try to get Stan logged in here. Oops. All right, so Stan's going to log in here. And when he logs in, and he tries to open up employees form here, and remember, We don't have any record here in Table 9 employees for any one of an employee type of 1. So when he tries to go and log in, there it is. So unless we specify in our Table 9 employees that you shouldn't have access, it's going to give you access. Well, that's not exactly the functionality that I want. I don't want to have to specify everybody who shouldn't have access. I really kind of want to make it only those people who should have access. So I need to fix this code check a little bit. I'm going to go back into the design view here, go into the onload event, and I'm going to use the NZ function, which is a function that if dlookup was to return a null value, in other words, it couldn't find anything on my Table 9 employees access that matched my where clause, then null to 0 turns that null into, by default, 0. That's what NZ stands for, null to 0. But you can also specify with the NZ function a different type of value. So we see this value if null. You can specify a different value that you want it to be that it returns. So in this case, I'm actually going to make it so that NZ function returns false if the value is actually null. So there we go. Let's go ahead and save that. And let's try Stan's logging in one more time. Let me close that. Okay, so now when Stan tries to open up the employees form, you do not have access. So there we go. Now we have an appropriate function here, an appropriate check that looks when the form tries to open and checks to see whether or not the user has access. Now, I could go ahead and take this whole big long thing here. Let's say I wanted to make it so that the check doesn't just happen when the form opens up, but also when the user tries to click on this Open Employees Form button. Okay, so I want the button itself to also have a check. So when the user goes to click on it, by default, it just opens up the form. But now I want to add that check. So if dlookup, and oh boy, there was all that stuff. I could copy and paste it. But what if there's a better way to do this? Okay, maybe some place that we can put this where it makes the check universally available throughout the entire database so that wherever we want to code it, it's very simple to get a result. I'm going to show you exactly how to do that, okay, so that you don't have to write a bunch of code every single time you want to put this check in. We're going to go ahead and go to this modules section here. And I have a globals module, which is just a module that's just a public place, okay? And in here, in my globals module, I'm going to create a brand new function. I'm going to call it public function user access. Okay? And in my function is going to return back a Boolean result. So it's going to return back, yes, this user does have access, or no, this user does not have access. And we're going to take that code from the employees form, this NZ lookup that we've got here, and I'm going to copy all of this. Okay, so this NZ lookup has access, checking the table and all that good stuff. I'm going to go ahead and copy that. I'm going to go back to my globals module, and I'm going to paste that into my function. And I'm going to actually make the user access, I'm going to make this user access function return back the result of that NZ lookup. So we're just going to do user access, user access equals the value that gets returned back by the NZ and the lookup. Okay, so whatever this returns back is going to be assigned to the user access variable, which is returned by the public function as a Boolean. Okay, so that's going to make things a lot simpler. However, me.name doesn't work, does it? So we need to pass the name of the form as a variable, because again, this is in my globals module, and me.name is not the name of the form anymore. So we actually need to pass it in as some sort of parameter into this function. We're going to do form name as string. But I'm also going to take it one step further. I'm going to go ahead, well, no, that should be, well, Yeah, that should be fine. We'll just do that. I was going to say let's go ahead and temp vars employee type and do it, but since it's a function anyway, there's really no need to pass that in either. But if you wanted to, just so I can explain this out, you could have done like employee type as integer. You could have done it like that and then just replaced employee type with this temp vars. But since temp vars is going to exist as it is, I don't think that we need to pass that in as a parameter. Okay, so that should be fine. We just need to ask, does this user have access to this form? But we do need to replace the me.name over here with that new parameter that's going to be passed in. So there we go. Let's go ahead and save that. Let me do a quick debug. Yeah, everything looks good. So now I can go back to the employees form, and instead of having this big long thing here, let's go ahead and delete that, and we're just going to do if globals dot user access, pass in the name of the form, which I can now say is FRM employees, or I could just do me.name, and now that'll check the globals or this user access function and return back whether or not that user that's currently logged in does in fact have access to that form that's being passed in. And now let's just give that a quick little check. Save that. Let's close this main form, close the employees form. Now let's try this again. So let's try me first. And when I try to open up the employees form, it works. Now let's try doing it with Jane. So J-Doe. And when Jane tries to open it up, you do not have access. And one last time, let's do. Let's see what happens when Stan tries to get in. Again, a success. So now we don't have to type that big long thing in. We've got one thing in our globals module that has that returns back a true or false boolean for us to tell us whether or not that user should or should not have access. Okay, great. So now that that's set up, let's talk about some other ways we can present the firewall. Okay, because last time we just did the we did the when it loads up, but now I want to do it, like I said before, on this button here. I want to make it so that the check happens when the user tries to open this sucker up. And when they do that, we're going to need to do another if statement, right? So if, now this time we can use that globals user access. So when the user tries to access, what form? What is the form that we want them to try to access? Well, that would be the FRM employees. So let's just pass that in as the name of the form that's trying to be opened. And if that is equal to true, then go ahead and open the form. Just do command open form. Okay. You could of course put a message here if it doesn't work. You could do a false. If false, then message box, you don't have access. Okay, and then else. So if it's false, if it returns false, then pop up at the message box. If it is true, then go ahead and open up the employees form. So let's go ahead and do that. And let's log in as, let's try Stan again. Oops. Okay, so when Stan tries to open up by clicking on the button, you do not have access. That's actually the button itself prompting you with that, not the form anymore. Okay, so now we've got two ways that we're doing that check, right? It's the same check essentially. It's still the same code that's doing and returning whether or not that user has access. It's just a different place that you're doing the check at. I'm going to show you one last thing, and that's I think is really cool to do, and that is it really helps enhance the user experience. It's if you just say whether or not the button should even be available if the user does or doesn't have access, because obviously it's probably better to just not even present them the button if they shouldn't be getting access to it. So what we're going to do is when this whole form, this form main opens up, I'm going to go to the onload event here, and in here I'm actually going to set the property of this button here, this Open Employees Form button. I'm going to set the visibility property of that button equal to whatever gets returned from our function that we built. Okay, so let's go back here. Let's do the me.btn employees. That's that button. Okay, its visible property is going to be set equal to either true or false value. And that's going to be the value that gets returned from our global user access function when they try to access the FRM employees. Okay, so now the visibility property of that button is set based upon whether or not that user access function returns true or false. Let's go ahead and save that. Hit a quick little debug, make sure I didn't fat finger anything, and everything looks good. So let's go ahead and close this down. I'm going to log in now as me, and when I log in, I can see the button, right? Let's go ahead and close the form. Try logging in again, but this time I'm going to log in as Jane Doe, and you'll see the button is not there. And what happens when Stan tries to log in? Button is not there. So the button exists, it's just not visible because we're changing the visibility property based upon what type of user they are. So there you go. There's 3 different ways that you can lock down the availability of a form. You can either, just go right to the form, make sure that when it loads up, that it does that check to see whether or not the user should have access to the form. You can do it when the user tries to click on a button that takes them to the form, or maybe some other interaction in your form. When that interaction happens that would normally open the form, check inside of the code first and do that function to check and see whether or not they should have access. And then the third thing, which just is really good for enhancing the user experience, is to, when the form loads up that would display the buttons that allow them to click on it, just go right into the onload event of that form and set the visibility property of that button or of that menu item based upon the results of that function and what it returns back. So there you go. I hope you guys enjoyed that. I hope that this is a very useful video for you that you can use later on. And like I said, if you have any questions, if you have any comments or anything that you need, please don't hesitate to drop me a line in the comments section of this video. And also, if you're a fellow viewer and you already know the answer to someone else's question, please feel free to drop in your answer and answer any questions that somebody else might have. This is really supposed to be a community where everybody helps everybody out. So please feel free to answer other people's questions if I'm not available. So there you go. Please don't forget to like, favorite, and subscribe if you like this video, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day.